Slow to wrath, a portrait of godly wisdom. Proverbs 14:29 states, "He that is slow to wrath is of great understanding, but he that is hasty of spirit exalteth folly." I used to go to college in Oklahoma. It was a Bible college called Heartland Baptist Bible College. And as a job, I used to do door-to-door sales. And one day when I was doing sales, a man pointed his gun at me. I knocked on the door, I said hello, and he had his .356 revolver on the side of his hip. And he pointed it out, and he pointed it towards my stomach. And that story made me think of how angry that man was. Because all I was doing was just knocking at his door. Maybe he felt threatened. But this man was not slow to wrath. Imagine the folly that could have been caused if that man had pulled that trigger. Or if I decided to report him to the police or defend myself or act in anger. Remember the verse that I said earlier. Let's go to the background of this text. Proverbs 14:29 says, "He that is slow to wrath is of great understanding, but he that is hasty of spirit exalteth folly." And the context of Proverbs 14 is basically a series of contrasting statements that compare the wise acts and the foolish acts, the wise man and the foolish man. And this chapter 14, it touches on themes like the benefits of wisdom, the dangers of folly, the importance of righteousness, and the consequences of sin. So what does this verse mean? In verse 29, Solomon contrasts two people. Person one is slow to wrath. Person two is hasty of spirit. Person one is praised for their great understanding. Person two is criticized for elevating folly. This reflects a common theme in Proverbs where patience and self-control and reflection are seen as marks of wisdom, whereas impulsive and uncontrolled behavior is associated with foolishness. And think of King Solomon. Solomon was talking to his son in chapter 1. And Solomon probably had to deal with a lot of short-fused people. King Solomon, he was the richest man in the world at that time. Thousands of wives and concubines. All the wealth the world could ever have. The king of Israel, King Solomon, the son of David. But Solomon had to apply godly wisdom. And Solomon asked God for wisdom. He could have asked God for anything in the world, but he asked God for wisdom. So in this verse particularly, Solomon teaches his son, and he teaches us, the wisdom of being slow to wrath. Now let me ask you, are you slow to wrath, or are you hasty of spirit? Because if you're slow to wrath, God will bless you. But if you're hasty of spirit, your folly is sure to come. So the main idea of this verse is that it contrasts the wise behavior, which is being slow to wrath, being slow to anger, and it contrasts that with the foolishness of being hasty and impulsive, hasty in anger, impatient, lacking self-control. And those are the indicators of true understanding and wisdom, whether or not you have self-control, and you're slow to wrath and you have patience, or you have the opposite of that. The Bible also says in James 1, verse 19 to 20, God instructed the believers to be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. Ecclesiastes 7, verse 9 says, anger resteth in the bosom of fools. So if you're quick to be angry, the Bible literally says that you're a fool if you're quick to be angry. And here are some more Bible verses that have to do with the consequences of not applying Proverbs 14:29, of not being slow to wrath. Proverbs 15:18 says, a wrathful man stirreth up strife, but he that is slow to anger appeaseth strife. Proverbs 29:22 says, an angry man stirreth up strife, and a furious man aboundeth in transgression. James 1:19 to 20 says, wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. Ecclesiastes 7:9 says, be not hasty in thy spirit to be angry, for anger resteth in the bosom of fools. Ephesians 4:26 to 27 says, be ye angry, and sin not. Let not the sun go down upon your wrath, neither give place to the devil. Proverbs 19:19, a man of great wrath shall suffer punishment, for if thou deliver him, yet thou must do it again. There's another story in the Bible found in Genesis about Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel were the first two sons of the first people to ever have been created, which is Adam and Eve. They were the first two sons of Adam and Eve. And one day it was time for them to have sacrifices, to give sacrifices to the Lord. And Abel was a shepherd. So he went and gave his sacrifice a lamb, a spotless lamb, without blemish, the best of his flock. And then Cain came along. He was a farmer. He gave some fruits and vegetables, and he didn't really think much of it. He didn't really give his best. And then all of a sudden, God said, hey, Abel's sacrifice was more acceptable than Cain's sacrifice. Why? Because Abel gave his best. So then, Cain got extremely angry and killed his brother. He killed his brother all because God found Abel's sacrifice more acceptable than Cain's. Now, what happened after was the folly. You see, Cain killing his brother, Abel, that was him being hasty. That was him being impatient and impulsive, not being slow to wrath. He was being quick to be angry and act on his anger. And then what happened after? Cain was punished. He received a mark on his head and a curse on his bloodline. Another verse in the Bible that talks about anger is Matthew 5:22. But I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council. But whosoever shall say, thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. So how can we apply this verse today? How can we apply Proverbs 14:29 in our lives? Number one, how do I typically respond when I feel angry or frustrated? Ask yourself that. Number two, ask yourself, what triggers my anger most frequently? Is it your spouse, your sibling, your schoolmates, your students? Number three, how do I respond to anger? And how does that impact my relationships? Number three, do I equate reactions with strength? Number five, how can I remind myself to pause before responding in difficult situations? What practical steps can I ensure that I give myself time to think before reacting in anger? Number six, how do I handle criticism or conflict? Number seven, am I impatient with others when they make mistakes or disappoint me? Number eight, do I consider the consequences of my words and actions before expressing anger? So what happens when you're not slow to wrath? When you're not slow to wrath, when you act on your anger in a sinful way, and you don't apply Proverbs 14:29, the result is folly. The result is damaged relationships, regretful actions, increased conflict, loss of respect, hindered personal growth, harm to your mental and physical health, spiritual consequences, missed opportunities for peace, negative example for others, even legal and professional repercussions. And people will make the excuse. People will make arguments saying that being slow to anger is a sign of weakness. Or if you don't express your anger immediately, you'll let people walk all over you. But Proverbs 15:1 says, a soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. So how can we apply this in our lives? Don't get on board with your emotions and feelings. Instead, get on board with the Word of God, because sometimes your emotions and feelings will cause you to sin and lash out in anger and hurt others around you. But when you're following the Word of God, what does it say? It says, be swift to speak, slow to hear, slow to wrath. Think of all the school shooters, or shooters in general, who were angry and they acted on their wrath. They acted on their anger. And they ended up killing innocent lives and hurting so many people and their families. Remember the verse that says, wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. So in conclusion, when you and your wife or your girlfriend are arguing, be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. When you and your spouse or your friend are getting into it, you guys are fighting, be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. When your siblings make a mess in the house and you get irritated by it, be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. When your teacher does something that you don't agree with, remember to be swift to hear and slow to speak and slow to wrath. Maybe you're a teacher and your students aren't paying attention to your class, or they're being disrespectful to you, or your kids are being disrespectful to you, or your boss or your coworker, or whoever it might be, or your teammate, your classmate, are being disrespectful to you, or they're doing something that you don't agree with. Be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. Jesus was the prime example of being slow to wrath. When he was up on that cross, the Bible says, yet he opened not his mouth. He was crucified and beaten and spat upon and mocked, yet he opened not his mouth. Jesus was slow to wrath. So wherever you are today, and if you're watching this video, and you know there are some issues in your life where you know that you need to be more slow to wrath and obey this principle in the Bible, you'll have to make a choice. Either you're going to choose to be hasty in spirit and choose folly, or you can choose to be slow to wrath, because when you're slow to wrath, you display a portrait of godly wisdom. So be slow to wrath, my friends.